Hello and welcome once again, library fans, patrons, and readers of all ages. Welcome to another episode of our virtual author talk. Today we are lucky and privileged to have Dr. Randy Overbeck here to talk about his many, many books and some other topics. So, Randy, welcome to our virtual author talk.
I'm delighted to be here, Dylan. I'm glad to take time with you today.
Yeah, and thank you again for taking that time. So we're going to talk a lot about all your books, but first, do you want to go into a little bit of your background? So how maybe your history. You've definitely got you've got some history with the schools. I want to talk about that a little bit too, and then maybe how you got into writing your novels.
Sure, I'll be glad to. I am a 40-year veteran of education. I was a teacher, a college professor, and a school leader. The last 28 years of my career, I ran school districts, four of them in southwestern Ohio, Lebanon, Xenia, Fairfield, and Washington Courthouse, or Miami Trace and Washington Courthouse. Um, and that was a very diverse group. Each of those districts were very, very different. Miami Trace was very rural. Xenia was had a very large urban section. Uh, Lebanon, of course, is very suburban. And then Fairfield was kind of in the rural side. So I got a lot of great experience. I was really privileged to work with lots of great teachers and administrators. But one of the things I did over the period of time is that I collected a lot of stories, a lot of characters. And what I've done is I've used that experience that I had in all of those circumstances to inform. They're not really the stories that are in my book, but they kind of inform the stories. They add a level of authenticity to the stories that's rare, because I know school, I know teachers, I know kids, I know administrators, and I think people who have read my books talk about how much it feels like that they are walking around in a school. So that's part of my goal. When I retired a few years ago, a decade ago, I had always wanted to be a writer. In fact, when I was a kid, when I was a high schooler, I kind of had images of being the next great American novelist. But then the call to serve kids came, and I answered, and I really, really enjoyed that. I would not have given up most of all of those 40 years for anything. But I never really lost my desire to be a writer. And one of the good things about the jobs that I had is that they required me to do lots and lots of writing. Now, they're not writing like people think of, certainly not novel writing, but I did all kinds of writing. I did newspaper articles, I did memos, I did agendas, I did recommendations. So I was constantly honing my skill of just trying to get words on the paper and do it in a way that conveys it effectively for people. So when I had the opportunity towards the end of my career, I'm going, I think I want to go back to what my first love was, and that was writing stories, creating, being a good storyteller is a better way to put it. And I was fortunate enough to do that. I now have five books published. Together, they've won 10 national awards. I've got a couple of bestsellers in the group, so I've been very, very lucky with my journey so far.
Yeah, and I think uh, if someone just goes on a search on your website or on Amazon or something, looks at the covers of your books, it may not be obvious, but um, I think you made mention of it. All of your books are at least partially, if not all, set in schools, right?
That is correct. What is consistent about all my books are, in every one of the five books published, the hero is a teacher.
Okay,
Now,
okay,
many of the stories actually take place in school. In fact, this newest book that we're going to talk about today, Cruel Lessons, the whole story almost takes place entirely in a school district.
right.
Others start in the school and then kind of extend beyond that. The last in the Haunted Shore Mysteries takes the characters is a school teacher, but he's on his honeymoon in Florida. So there is a connection to school, but it's not as tight as some of the others. But what my goal was, in my real world, in the 40 years that I experienced, all of my all of my heroes were always teachers. So I thought, well, if I'm going to create convincing fiction, then I want to create convincing heroes that are teachers. And to be honest, I used characteristics of people that I knew to
Yeah.
build my heroic characters.
And I think, and I know you talk a lot, you talk to budding authors a lot, and of course that's the typical line, like write what you know. So, you're taking from your vast experience and taking all those characters and those experiences that you collected from those years at school. That's great. One of the other things I thought was interesting, speaking of consistencies, is that all three Haunted Shores books have some shade of red in the title. Did you know you were going to do that when you first started writing them, or?
Well, I did. I really didn't. The idea for the title for the first book. First of all, I have to be honest with you. Titles are something I struggle with immensely. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not one of these guys who go, "Oh, that'd be a great title." I work on it, and sometimes I bounce it off my writers group, and sometimes they come up with ideas. But we came up with the first book. So originally, Blood on the Chesapeake was the first book, and it takes place on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay. And then, so we decided to make the series a Haunted Shore Mystery. So all of the stories in the series, including a new one that I'm writing right now, take place in a shore town of some kind.
Okay.
That's the connection between them. But then I wanted to kind of step one step further. So if it was blood in the first one, well, then the second one is crimson. And then the third one, Scarlet at Crystal River. I haven't yet decided on how I'm going to tie the red into the fourth one yet, but I'll probably come up with some way to do that.
Well, maybe if people visit your website, they can just throw some shades of red at
Maybe,
you. See if
maybe
some,
I'll run a contest, see if somebody come up with the best idea.
there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah, the best
a
shade of.
great idea.
Um, and moving back a little bit, we were talking about the school experiences and how you've got educators as main characters and so forth. Your first book, though, is it I, what percentage takes place in the actual school? Because I know it's a very high percentage. Is it?
It
Is it?
is. And the first book, which is Leave No Child Behind,
Yeah.
is a very different book. It's a thriller about a terrorist cell taking over a school in Midwest, high school in the Midwest, and a teacher who works with a volunteer who's a Navy SEAL that happens to be in the building on the day this happens. And the two of them figure out a way to defeat the terrorist cell. So in that book, everything, well, no. The vast majority of the narrative takes place in the school, but threads of the story also follow the villains
Okay.
from the East over to why they are doing what they are doing.
Right.
There's also another thread that we're following the White House who's monitoring this situation. So
Yeah.
there are those different threads in that story. And I wanted to make a comment. You said correctly that one of the first advices I give to writers is to write what you know, that you have more in your store than you really believe that you do. But the other part is that for each one of my books, that there's no exception to this, I had to do a huge amount of research because there are large, even though I'm talking about things happening in schools, lots of the things that happen are things I had no knowledge of. So I had to go to people who had that knowledge, or sometimes the research is written and online and all that kind of stuff. But I don't want to give the impression that I'm just writing school stories.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
when I did the one on terrorists, which was published in 11, there wasn't a lot of research out yet on that, and I had to
Okay.
find, what was the motivation behind these people? How did they recruit them? All those kinds of things. I
Yeah.
had to get help from federal prosecutors in terms of what would the crimes be that they were talking about. So in every aspect of the story, and writers need to know this, if they're going to create a multi-layered story, they're probably going to need help from somebody else to be able to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's the flip side of the write what you know is like, well, okay, that means um, I'm not a ghost, so I can't write supernatural. I've not killed anybody, so I can't write a murder mystery, right?
Right.
So
Uh,
write what you know, but you can make up some things too.
right. Well, and then when I wrote the ghost parts, which are parts of the all three, soon to be four haunted shore mysteries,
Yeah.
I did a lot of research on the paranormal to try to make my segments as realistic as possible. I have a little stick that I tell people when I'm telling about it. I said, now, my ghost stories are not really like most other people's ghost stories. So I don't know if you are a fan of ghost fiction. Ghost fiction generally falls in two categories. Category A, I call the Stephen King category, and that is that things are horrible and ghosts are gory and they scare you to death and all that kind of stuff. Dean Koontz, Shirley Jackson are all in those categories.
Right, right.
The other category is what I call Casper the Friendly Ghost, where it's usually in a cozy, and the ghost is my grandmother, and she had this yarn store before I took it over, and okay,
Right, right.
okay. Well, what I learned in my research is neither one of those two have any basis in what we've been able to document about ghosts.
Okay.
So there is a great amount of consistent evidence, even scientific evidence, about how ghosts interact with humans, and neither one of those even come close to it. For example, ghosts never can solve mysteries. They can't. And the whole idea about a malignant ghost is exceedingly rare.
Okay.
So what I did in my books when I did that research is every, I don't want to exaggerate here, almost every interaction that my fictional ghost has with my characters has been documented as that how ghosts have interacted with human
Okay.
beings.
Okay.
So my ghosts don't solve the mystery. Don't tell them
Right.
who the killer is. They don't,
Right, right.
but they are able to do enough things that lead my protagonist, my hero, to be able to seek justice, which is what his mantra is.
Um, I'm glad you mentioned this aspect because I wanted to talk about that a little bit. The last time you were at the library, I wrote down October 2019, and you did a presentation. And then you were at the Harmon Museum, I think 2 years after that, doing a
Yep,
presentation. So, talk a little bit about these presentations you've been doing because they feature pretty. I mean, on your website and as well as your Facebook page and so forth, they share space with the talk about your books and so forth. But you've been doing these presentations for a while too.
I have. I've actually done. I calculated. I'm doing a training session for some other teachers. So I
Okay.
actually calculated them up. I've done over 300 of these, what I call book talks, but they're really talks about different aspects that have some connection to my book. I actually have four different talks that I've done over the years. My original talk was called Teachers of Real American Heroes. And I did that in 11 and 12, 13, 14, more than 150 times all over the United States. And then when the new books came out, I developed two talks. One, I actually only plan to do one, called Things Still Go Bump in the Night.
Okay.
And what happened was that was so popular, the groups asked me to come back. So I developed a second topic called A Few Favorite Haunts, which is about of places around in this area that are reportedly haunted and the stories behind them. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then I have a brand new one that's just coming out this year called Everything You Wanted to Know About Book Publishing But Couldn't Care to Ask. So, and that's just getting started. So in the one that I think you're referring to, the ones I've shared the most, which is the Things Still Go Bump at Night and the Haunted Shore and the Few Favorite Haunts, I basically talk about how ghosts what do we know about how ghosts interact with our culture? What does the role ghosts have in our culture? I talk about the roles that ghosts have uh, in uh, in religion. I talk about how ghosts are involved in the entertainment world, and I talk about I give viewers a chance to uh, I share with them the very famous people that they know who believe in ghosts that they would never have guessed.
Right.
So I kind of build this. My shtick is ghosts are not just for children and Halloween. There's this
Mhm.
broad range of support of people who are out there. That all predate manipulation, and I let them kind of decide for themselves about I've done the research, and none of these photos have been. They've been every photo's been examined by photo experts. None of them are double exposures or manipulated in any way, so they can figure out, well, is this really an actual photo of a ghost, and then
Right, right.
kind of go from there.
Um,
At the very end of each of the presentations, I do a little piece, 3 minutes, on my books and how ghosts or whatever I'm talking about tie to my particular books. But my goal really is trying to entertain or inform the group about this subject. And then certainly hopefully I whet your appetite. You might be interested in my books. If you are, here they are.
yeah, and as you said, a lot of that research, a lot of that uh, looking into the paranormal and investigating that, you pour a lot of that back into the Haunted Shores mysteries, definitely. Um, and so, oh yeah, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because I think, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but the three books came pretty much one after the other. Um, and then you said you've got a fourth one
2019,
coming.
2020, and 2021.
Yeah.
So,
Did
yeah.
you feel like so first of all, when you were writing them did you feel like you were writing a trilogy? Were you kind of evolving the characters as if you were going to end it at book three? And then second of all, if you didn't, um, what was the break between book three and book four like for you?
Um, that's a really good question. So let me be honest with you. When I wrote the first book, um, the first book came out in 19. The contract was signed in 17. And I probably started the research in 2014. That's just kind of okay. And at that point, all I had in mind was I have an idea for what I think might be a good story. At that point, my wife and I had traveled, 3, 4 times maybe, to the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, a place that we really love. We've been back, I don't know, we may have been there 10 times by now. Um, and it's a very quiet, very not very developed, um, very interesting place. And it had a very interesting history. So I thought if I could find a way to blend the history of the area in with a good mystery. And then, and actually the idea about having a ghost came later. That was kind of a
Oh,
later
okay.
thing. So that wasn't part of the original plan. But one of my goals, Dylan, when I write a story is that yes, I know that whoever picks the book up, they want to have fun. They want to be entertained. They want to solve the who done it, all that kind of stuff. But I also want the book to address or at least expose a serious issue that the society is grappling with. So in the first book, that issue became racial injustice, and the setting begged that particular story because even though I really, really love the Eastern Shore, it is a perfect example of the struggle the country is going on because the area has kind of a dual personality. So on the one hand, it's kind of like New England and it's a shipping thing and it's kind of progressive. But on the other hand, they sided with that area sided with with the South in the Civil War. And day, even though, and this story takes place in 98. So it seemed to me that that was the perfect cauldron to create the story about, in my case, it's a murder, a lynching that had been covered up. So that's kind of how the first one got started. It was so popular when I came out, I said, oh, immediately the readers started sending me, are you going to write more?
Okay.
And I said, okay, all right. So then I decided, I tried to make it realistic. So I tried to figure out, well, how am I going to get my character to a different shore. It's not magic. This is a teacher, so he doesn't have money. So I had to kind of come up with ways that he would end up in another place that would have well, I need to back up. I didn't want to do this thing where they did in Jessica Fletcher, where you have this little tiny town and there are 100 murders in this tiny town.
Right. Yeah.
Go on. I'm not doing that. So I wanted him to be someplace else. So that's kind of, kind of like the Billy Doyle series that James Ben writes. I don't know if you know that. It's
Yeah.
the
World
story.
War II. Yeah.
Yeah, or he moves them to a different place.
Right.
Or Bada Bar's ones where she takes Anna Pigeon to a different national park for each time. So I kind of wanted to do that.